think I'm crazy,
Have to lie in those big rocks.
but I feel her. I hear her heartbeat. She's so close.
So what does her heartbeat sound like?
Mighty.
Hello everyone, David here. Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays. I am back to do another podcast segment because every time there's some form of temple event, whether it be for a film or a video game, I feel like, you know what, especially if it has nothing to do with Batman or Spider-Man and it doesn't look like it's something that I really want to talk about on the channel, but I still want to talk about it in long form format, that's pretty much where we tender the Dark Spider-Cast. And so we're entering a new episode, this time for a spoiler-free review, no spoilers. So I don't know exactly how deep I can get into this film, but we do have another form of a cinematic event because after 13 years since not only the original film, but his last legitimate directorial effort, James Cameron brings us this long-awaited and very much talked about, mostly by himself, a sequel to Avatar, The Way of Water. And so I know that this review is by default kind of late at this point because the movie came out on the 16th, I believe, Friday the 16th. And I went to go see the movie with my girlfriend on the 21st because that was the next time that we were both not only available, she was off from work, but also because I know that with a movie of this caliber, similar to of the first one, where Cameron often talks about in interviews how there's specific ways of watching the film and how he developed new technologies for it, you know, the same deal that he's been hyping up for quite literally like 13 years. I know it sounds like I'm bashing a little bit on James Cameron. There are moments of arrogance. There's moments in which I can feel like he's a bit self-indulgent when it comes to those things that I do feel like, you know, you need to focus more on the movie. And I'll get into this a little bit more broader and more detail when I get into the review. But since Avatar, you know, I just feel like the James Cameron that we got back in the 90s, the 80s and the 90s, that gave us Aliens, Terminator and Terminator 2, even hell, Titanic. And then, of course, some of the slightly lesser known stuff, even though it's kind of known, it's not. I'm not going to say go as far as to call it obscure, but not a whole lot of people talk about it these days with movies like True Lies, or The Abyss. You know, it's talked about. They're not obscure movies, but not to the level of fucking Terminator 2 and Titanic. Not to that extent. And so since then, I just don't feel like we get that Cameron anymore. Now he's in the full-blown Avatar universe, at least for a little while. Because that's one of the things that explains the 13-year gap, is that apparently he was shooting some of the sequels back-to-back. He shot for sure 2 and 3 is slated for 2024. Supposedly, he has drafts of scripts and some stuff shot for 4 and 5, but even he has said that he's like, he doesn't know if he's gonna full on finish them or if he's gonna perform some kind of apprenticeship, or I don't know what the full details are of him creating the sequels. But basically, he's finally breaking the gap by delivering on the second film. And so with the advancements in technology and everything that he's developed and talked about, I knew that this was a movie that needed to at least kind of, I don't even want to say meet him halfway, but just take advantage of how accessible it is to find more and more theaters, especially since 2009, and how much more slightly affordable it is to witness some of these things in that high caliber of technology, specifically 3D and some form of large format screen. And that's why I wanted to make sure that me and the girlfriend saw the movie in that format. And so, ironically, at the very last second, she found out that she was actually off the Friday that the movie came out, the 16th. But unfortunately, by then, tickets were sold out for those formats that I wanted to watch the movie in, whether it be in IMAX 3D or Dolby Cinema 3D in the AMC Burbank Theater. And so I looked ahead, and the 21st was really the only next day that she was off. I was obviously off, and so we were able to plan it ahead and book the tickets right in the center. And this time, I broke from tradition. Typically, with these kind of movies, I wanted to see them in IMAX, but I thought to myself, let's try a little bit different and go for that Dolby. Mainly out of recommendation from Maximilian Dude. If any of you listening are in the streaming scene, if you watch a lot of streams on Twitch and you are um, somewhat in line with the fighting game community, the FGC, and fighting game community news, you know who Maximilian Dude is. And so I was watching one of his streams one day, and he said that based on the way that he watched the remastered version of the original 2009 film, that also came with a preview for The Way of Water, he recommended, via his interpretations and his impressions, that Dolby Vision or Dolby Digital or Dolby Cinema, Dolby 3D is supposedly the method to see the film because IMAX, even though it's a bigger screen, it slightly stretches the picture. Whereas Dolby, it's still a larger size screen, larger than your typical ones that you go when you see a movie in just a regular ass theater. But what works in favor of Dolby is not only the audio, but also the color spectrum you're getting across the board whenever you witness certain environments. There's a bigger color gamut. So you're getting much more colors per pixel and the resolution is sharper, even though your screen is not as big as IMAX. So I took it upon I took upon his word and booked those tickets, and we saw it in Dolby Cinema 3D. It's first 3D movie in a while. And so, first impressions of the film is that, yes, going in, I knew that it was over 3 hours. 3 hours and 10 minutes to be specifically. It's just 4 minutes shy of fucking Titanic. So I feel like we're in the long haul now that from now on, Cameron is just going to be making long movies. I really don't think he's going to be making anything short. I mean, it makes the first movie kind of forgiven by comparison because the first movie is 2 hours and 40 minutes, which sounds long, but at the same time, it's like, well, it's almost a whole half hour shorter. So, it's a bit more digestible, and it's on Disney Plus right now. So you can check it out, with the luxuries of being able to pause and fast forward, etc. And so, after walking out of the film, I felt exhausted. But I don't necessarily mean that in either a good way or a bad way. I mean that in the sense that it's a combination of it being a long movie, and then me and the girlfriend watching it in not only 3D but Dolby 3D, because you have the bigger screen, you have much more visual, quite literally, quite technically, more visual data being fed into your brain. And this combined with having a slightly bit sleepless nights recently because I've been stressed. It's the holidays, got a lot on the mind. The night before, ironically, I actually did get a good amount of sleep, but I was still just a little bit on the groggy side from the melatonin gummies I took. How do I put this? Actually, there's really no other way to put it, but I was fighting sleep in the middle of this movie. But I can't bring myself to necessarily say that the movie is boring, because it technically has a very firm stance of what it's trying to do, which is world building. It's very, very clear that Cameron is invested in this world. Like I said, he's in it for the long haul. And he definitely wants to build a world to bring you in, to escape Earth, to get off of this fucking boring rock, especially with the calamities of COVID, humans ceasing to be human these days, and the internet constantly reminds us every single hour of every single day. And I get the impression that James Cameron really wants us to escape this world and go into a brand new one that even he, as a writer and director, can lose himself in. And I get that impression from the way he is able to build this world and how he takes his time of framing those floating rocks. I can't remember what their names are, but basically the little floating islands that you see in Pandora, and how to actually make this feel like a different world. I mean, we already kind of got the sense of that in the original, but here, again, he spends like the first hour or so kind of reestablishing the setting of the very forest, rural areas with the wildlife and the environments and the cinematography. And once about an hour in, once we get out of the first act and into act two, is when then we get the water in the subtitle "Way of Water." Because I knew I recognized that. I was about to ask myself, like, for a movie called Way of Water, is there not an awful lot of water? But then something clicked in my brain and instantly thought that's the point. I think they want the place to look as dry as possible without betraying how this ecosphere, this ecology that Cameron built in the world of Pandora really works. You know, he's not going to purposely dry out the entire area, but he's not going to go overboard the way that we saw in some of the trailers. And so finally, through the events of the plot in the film, that I sadly have to use the term loosely, we finally get into the gist of why it's called the Way of Water and why it took so long to make sure that these effects were nailed to a T. Because once again, kind of like how in the gaming side of things, you know, a New Horizon movie comes, I mean, a New Horizon game comes out, but then there's always something else that kind of upends it every single time. It looks like Avatar is that movie where every single time that there's a new, from now on, whenever an Avatar movie comes out, if Cameron really is that guy to take his time with the visual effects and his visual effects team to make sure everything is absolutely fucking nailed, I'm sorry, any other effects-driven movie that had a shot this year of getting best visual effects, if you know that an Avatar movie's coming out, sorry, but you're losing the Oscar. That Oscar's gone. Because if Avatar's coming out, Avatar's getting the Oscar for best visual effects, and I feel like there's no contest here with Way of Water because everything's much more refined of what they built on in the original film, especially with the way that the Na'vi look, the realistic, like that's the thing, like not once, this is the biggest praise that I can give this movie, not once did I look at Neytiri, Jake, any of the Na'vi characters, the children, the enemies, the antagonists, etc., every single one of the characters here, that's the thing. They felt like characters. I never thought that I looked at these characters and thought they're visual effects. No, I actually thought that these were characters and I was watching them do the things that they were doing, living in their life, living in the villages, going about their day-to-day, catching fish, gathering food, doing their normal stuff on Pandora. I actually absorbed that and as an actual life routine. And so that's definitely one of the things that they were trying to do with the visual effects and Cameron with his direction is to bring me into the world and use the effects as a storytelling device and not be, look how showy we are. And that's one thing that was immaculately crafted and really well thought out and balanced was that the effects here, I really felt like I was in this world, and the 3D definitely helped out, especially for some of the much more water-based scenery. Whether we were inside of the water, deep underneath the water, and watching the wildlife kind of just swim about, that entranced even my girlfriend. She was like, yeah, she loves going to the beach. She loves bodies of water. She loves being in the water, period. Like, she's one of those people that believes that she was a mermaid in a different life, and she adores it. Obviously, her favorite Disney movie is going to be The Little Mermaid, and that's her favorite character. So, and she's a Pisces, so it's all fucking lined up. And her favorite dish is fish, seafood, specifically salmon. So, trust me, like when this movie finally dives into the depths of the sea of Pandora and it goes full-blown 3D and we get to witness all these things, it really is on a whole nother level that seeing it at home is not going to do it justice. If you have even the iota of wanting to see this film, even if it wasn't day one like us, we didn't see it day one. We saw it here the Wednesday after. If you're planning, if you even had the slight instinct to want to go see it on Christmas Day, Christmas Eve, New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, check it out. And granted, that could also lend into its potential success, kind of like the first movie, because I remember the first movie did the same thing, where it didn't really open huge on that opening weekend. It was over the 2 or 3 weeks after its release that it started to just snowball out of control into being one of the biggest top grossing movies of all time. Way of Water could do the same thing, not only because, again, it's a bit more accessible to find theaters that have this kind of 3D technology, but also because that's really where the biggest strength of the movie lies, is how awesome the effects are, not only with the Navi, like I mentioned, but the water. This is arguably the most realistic water effects that you'll ever witness. Like, I had to constantly remind myself everything in this fucking frame that I'm looking at right now is digitally made. Even the water. I'm pretty sure they probably shot some stuff as far as reference material, but no, like this is this is everything that I'm watching here is an effect, and I forget about it. I legit forget that that is the case, and if I'm doing that, the job is very much well done. So, as far as the effects, as far as the technical achievements found in this movie, that's nailed 100%. And it warranted the extra ticket price of either watching this in Dolby Vision like I did, or if I had watched it in IMAX, I would have felt rewarded in that sense no matter what. But make no mistake, it is a little bit on the physically draining side because not only is the 3D demanding just a little bit more of you to kind of acclimate the eyes. It's kind of like when the best way that I can put it, being a glasses wearer ever since I was like 12 or 13, is, for any of you fellow listeners who have glasses, remember, especially when you were younger, and if you've been wearing glasses since you were a teenager or a child, when you would get a new prescription and that whole day, you wouldn't necessarily like get disoriented or even dizzy. You would just get much more tired because your brain is over here going, oh shit, like shit sharper, I need to absorb this visual data. I need to acclimate, and that would just physically drain you even though you're not moving or working out all that much. It would do that, and that's what this movie would do, especially being 30 minutes longer than the original film and possibly about an hour longer than it needed to be. This segues perfectly into the movie's greatest weakness, which is that, similar to the first film, the script is not all that there. The script did not need to call for a 3-hour movie, and that's because, like I mentioned before, Cameron really wants to build this world, really wants you to be invested in this world, that there are some sequences where, as beautiful as they may be in Dolby Vision, I can guarantee you right now, when I watch them later on Disney Plus, whatever streaming service it lands on, which likely will be Disney Plus because Disney owns 20th Century Studios, there's gonna be some skipped moments or some moments where my girlfriend's probably gonna be watching because she's gonna still be lost in the waves, the eternal the perpetual waves of the Pandora Sea. But I'm probably going to be checking my phone or looking at something else because there's times where it does tread, pun intended, on some slight self-indulgence where it really was about advancing that technology and making sure that all of these things were gotten right, if that's even a phrase, that the script really doesn't call. I really do wish I could know how long the script really is, if it really was 180 pages, because I wouldn't be surprised if the final script is only about 120, 130, maybe 140. And if any of you are film people, if you've gone to film school or you study film, you're thinking about a career in filmmaking or whatever, you know that the rule of thumb, the general rule of thumb that doesn't necessarily need to be followed, I understand that, but the general rule of thumb is that a script page equals to about a minute of film, of actual like film screen time. So generally when a movie is about 2 hours long, the script is about 110 to about 125, 130 pages. And of course, there's no script pages for the end credits, which adds on. So this movie being 3 hours and 10 minutes, shave off those last 10 because you're really dealing with a 3 hour flat movie. Did it really need to call for that? Because again, at times the movie can be a little self-indulgent with how it lingers on shots to show you how amazing this world is, how the water is. But sometimes the script is not even that strong to begin with, because similar to how a lot of people were calling the first film Pocahontas, Fern Gully, more specifically, not only does this movie kind of re-tackle those same environmental themes, this time not so much on the environment, but more so on wildlife, of how, against poaching, against people hunting for sport, things like that, or harvesting materials that they don't need to be harvesting and selling, because that's ultimately what they're going to do. They're going to sell it. They're not going to be using it for resource, for food, or shelter, or anything like that, for survival. This movie tackles those themes, but it still does it through a lens or in a framing that still feels like the first one. You know, it doesn't really push it forward. And then the ways that sometimes these characters are interacting or portrayed on screen are still, I don't want to say two-dimensional, because there's one character that is returning from the first movie. And there's a bit of a dichotomy happening with this character, because on the one hand, I like that this character is a bit more fleshed out and is given more screen time to kind of flex their antagonistic muscles. And I really like this actor as a character actor. Like, whenever he pops in a movie, I'm like, oh, yo, it's this guy. And here's the thing. I'm trying not to spoil it, even though the trailers kind of already hint of who this person is. So it's like, you can go and look it up if you want to, but just in case, if you have been staying away from the trailers or not going on IMDb, etc., seeing the cast listing, just in case, I won't say anything. I won't. But this character comes back from the first movie, and like I said, I'm on the fence, because on the one hand, I'm like, I like that this character, because he's a character actor, got more screen time. He's able to chew up the scenery a bit more. He's charismatic in this role. But the method of how he's brought back, the explanation of how he's brought back, is a little lazy, is a little like, well, I shouldn't have done that in the first movie, so we're just going to go ahead and undo that. It takes away from the stakes, because now knowing that this is in the world, it's like, well, now if a character dies, they can just do this. They can just do this. It's like magic. You know, or what the MCU has been doing now with the multiverse. Well, if this character dies, there might be a multiversal version of them in Earth, yada yada. It's like, it's kind of taking a little bit of that weight away. Unless you're able to establish new rules. And again, a little bit of the characterization is not the strongest. We got our main character, Jake Sully. And I found him way more, even though he's not this most strongly written character, even in the first one, he wasn't, like I said, he was playing the John Smith character from Pocahontas, the Disney Pocahontas, not the actual real life John Smith, but the Disney Pocahontas, where they're sent in to take care of these quote unquote savages, but they end up falling in love, so then they turn, and again, Ferngully. He's a lot shallower here in this second one. I saw some reviews say that they hated him, that he was unlikable. I won't go to that extent of like, oh, he is detestable or anything like that, but he's definitely not charismatic or compelling in the slightest sense. I'm just like, all right, he's just someone that we're watching on screen, just somebody there. Neytiri, who has an indefinitely smaller amount of screen time than even in the first movie, even she has something going on, especially towards the end, where I'm like, oh, this looks interesting. But sadly, the movie, ironically, being 3 hours, ends right when that's starting to kind of roll and get interesting again, because this entire time, we were lingering on too much of the world building. I'm sorry, the camera was too much like, hey guys, look at this, and pretty soon you'll be able to experience this at Disneyland Resort or Disney World Resort, whatever. Because I know that there's like a Pandora section, I think in Shanghai or the Disneyland in Korea. I don't know, one of those two that you can experience. Kind of felt like they were setting up things for that, or at the very least, in the most sincere form to be able to tell this, that Cameron again was just trying to show how much stronger he is with his world building and with the technology that again was doing a great job of sucking me in and making me feel like I was in a world as opposed to in a visual effect. That was achieved. I just wish we could have achieved that just as strongly with the writing and with the characterization, because I still feel like it didn't really call for this movie to be the 3 hours. I still felt the time. I still felt that time. And to me, the ultimate litmus test is that if I can still feel the running time of your movie, whether I'm in the theater or I'm at home, it didn't need to be that long. And I have the perfect examples for both theater and at home experiences. The last two movies that were 3 hours or over 3 hours, and I did not feel the running time whatsoever. Yes, a little bit of a nerdy, geeky bias here. Avengers Endgame. That movie went like that. Before I knew it, it was over. And that's a full 3 hours. And yes, it's the culmination of the MCU Phase 3 with the battle against Thanos, the biggest payoff and the biggest homage to that entire lineage. And they handled it well. Now, at home, and in a much more artistic, very acclaimed and prestigious manner, because I had to watch it for class, and up until that point, I have never seen it. I know, sacrilege, but The Godfather, Part 1, not Part 2, but Part 1. I had to watch it because I was doing a history class, a movie history class for film school on Coppola, Francis Ford Coppola. And as sacrilegious as this is going to sound, being a film guy, I had still not seen The Godfather, the original, up until that point. So, being that it was an assignment for class, I'm like, perfect. We can finally get it out of the way. And I booted it up on my computer here at home, connected it to the TV, watched it. I'm at home. I can pause it. I can rewind. I can go get a snack. I can go to the bathroom. Never happened. And the movie is, I think, even a little longer than Way of Water. It's 3 hours, I think 3 hours and 13, 3 hours and 14, something like that. And I was just so sucked in and immersed. I'm here at home. I can pause it. And I never did it. I never did it. Okay? And I was here at home. So, and I didn't feel the runtime. Before I knew it, it was over. And I was like, oh shit, it's done. Again, if I can feel your running time, didn't need to be that long. And to show you that I'm not even all that biased, as much as I still love this movie, The Batman, there were times here and there where I'm not going to say we needed to have cutscenes, but they needed to have been trimmed, like sped up just a little bit as far as how they were filmed. And that's The Batman. So trust me when I say that even for Avatar: The Way of Water, it did not need to be 3 hours. And recognizing what the script was and how the plot kind of unfolded, I'm thinking to myself, yeah, it didn't need to be 3 hours, 2.5 at most, because an awful lot of the characterization and plot, and there were times where even I thought to myself, I know where this is going with certain characters, how they're gonna turn, how they're gonna feel about something. I'm like, watch, that's gonna happen, and sure enough, it did. It was kind of playing it safe because the script felt more like a vehicle, a vessel for Cameron to be able to build this world, which is fine. But then at that point, maybe, the whole, I don't know. Because on the one hand, I want to say that at that point, you need to probably be able to turn to other mediums like a TV show where you could tell it over episodes, or something that they're actually planning on doing so up until it got delayed, a video game, which we are by Ubisoft. I just wish it wasn't Ubisoft because of, what Ubisoft is. But yeah, I'm at odds with this movie because I love the world building, but I just personally did not feel like the script needed to be at the 3 hour mark, and they needed to have to have cut the movie. Outside of that, though, like I said, there's glimpses here and there of classic Cameron where he knows how to handle an awful lot of the science fiction-y stuff. He knows how to handle, again, the world building and how sometimes the organic nature of Pandora works versus the human stuff with their cool amp suits and the different mechanisms of how the robots work. There's this new robot that kind of looks like a crab, and I love that vehicle. Like, I wish I was able to drive it. So across the board, like, he knows how to world build. I just wish that he will have a stronger script for the remaining 3 films, and he can also settle on a frame rate. Because something that I think I did read a few weeks ago, but I completely forgot up until the movie started, was the high frame rate. That I understood why he was doing it. Again, it plays into the visual effects and how he was able to cater to how strong the effects game has been elevated here 13 years after the original. He was trying to reduce motion blur so that it favors the 3D, but I can't stand it when IMAX movies flip aspect ratios. I will stand it even less when a movie is flipping back and forth on frame rates. I'm sorry, but nah. And thank God it didn't give me any kind of like vertigo or even a stronger headache. But it was really bothering me how. And this is a word of caution: if you are planning on watching the movie in 3D, the 3D effects on their own, they work well with, again, the world building, the visual effects, how immersed I was. But the one thing that I will have to give you a bit of a warning on is the frame rate. Because there's shots that are on the 24 frames, the standard movie frame rate. And then there's other shots that are the double, I think the 48 or the 60. So it's flipping back and forth between looking like a video game or a soap opera, the soap opera effect, as some people have called it, and then an actual movie. And it's all happening within the same scene. So the same scene is happening, but you have one shot in the 24 and then another shot in the 60. And I'm like, yo, and I think I heard Maximilian when he was doing his recommendation for the Dolby. He said in the preview that when they were on the surface, it was 24, but when they went on the water, it was 60. And so when I heard this, I was like, okay, that kind of makes sense because you want it to be fluid in the water, reduce the motion blur. Cool. I thought it was going to stick to that. No, because as I mentioned before, in the first opening hour, we're strictly in the forest area of Pandora. We're not going underwater. And even when characters are just kind of talking, there's a shot where it's at 24 and there's another shot where it's at 60, where it's like a wide shot. And as time went on, I caught on to what was happening. Cameron was trying to reduce motion blur with high action movement, and that's when you get to 60, even if it's character just sprinting, like on a tree branch or something. And then when they slowed down, that's when we cut back to 24. And they're just having a conversation. Even then, again, it feeds a little bit into my OCD, especially when certain IMAX movies would flip back and forth on the aspect ratio because some shots were shot with the IMAX camera and then others were shot with regular 35 millimeter or, the regular anamorphic lenses. This is retroactively doing the same thing, only it's even, to me, kind of worse because it's fucking with the aspect ratio. And with the frame rate, the aspect ratio I can maybe kind of forgive. I've kind of gotten used to it over time. Frame rate, not so much. If I hear that this is going to happen again with the third Avatar movie, I'm sorry, Cameron, but nah, man. Nah, if this happens, if I hear people walk out of the third movie saying, yeah, it's happening again where he's flipping back and forth between frame rates, I'm probably just going to see this in non-3D. I'll still see it in the theater so I can get a premium, slightly better than average presentation of the film, but I can't stand that whole frame rate thing. It pisses me off. I was hoping that at this point the length of the movie will kind of work in its favor and flip the script, pun intended, because then at least my eyes will again acclimate. But by proxy, it ended up tiring me out to the point where 2 hours into the movie, I was starting to nod off, and thankfully, just in time for the final battle, was able to kind of wake myself up slightly. Even with some of the explosions that were going on via the awesome Dolby Cinema sound system. So, my final verdict or final impressions is that if you're going to watch this movie, you really are going to be watching it for the world building. And if you were hooked, even with the original back in 2009, similarly to how my girlfriend was, because she was like, oh my gosh, it's happening, we're actually getting a sequel, then you probably already have your mind made up by now, right? And if you are going to be seeing it in the theaters, you definitely need to experience it in the formats that Cameron is intending, which is either IMAX 3D or Dolby Cinema 3D. Just know ahead of time that frame rate is going to be flipping back and forth, and if you don't mind, I think that right now a good way to test it out, this is going to sound a little bit condescending, but I would say the best way to test it out is to go to either Target, Best Buy, or Walmart, go to the TV section, and go to the TV section, go to the TVs that are mounted up on the wall, especially the high premium stuff, and go and watch the feed that they're rolling between different televisions, because I can guarantee you that at least one TV will have the motion flow thing turned on where they're doubling the frame rate, so it has that soap opera look. And then the other TV is going to have it off. At least one of the other TVs are going to have it off, and you're going to see a clip of a movie play at the regular 24 frames per second. And then the other TV that has it on is going to be playing it at like 48 frames to 60 frames. It's going to have that smooth, again, like it's called soap opera look. Go back and forth between those two feeds. Like literally take your eyes off of one, go to the other, go back and forth, back and forth. That's how Avatar Way of Water is going to look like when you watch it in 3D. If you feel like it's not going to bother you so much, go see it in 3D in either Dolby Cinema, especially in some of the more metropolitan areas like LA, Burbank, New York, etc., or IMAX 3D, because then you could get the bigger sound system, the bigger screen. Maybe not the same color gamut as far as color spectrum and HDR like Dolby Cinema, because Dolby Cinema definitely delivered on the HDR and the color spectrum. It's very sharp. I saw a lot of color. I saw a lot of vibrancy that really made Pandora stand out even more. But you have to know about those caveats, that from a technical perspective, that frame rate could be bothersome for folks out there. And then if you want a little bit more meat on your bone as far as a story, as far as plot developments, as far as character development with your movies, similar to the first film, Avatar is going to come a little short. It's not going to handle it in a very terrible fashion. It's not like it's got cringe dialogue and cringe acting or anything like that. In fact, if I was to praise some of the acting, I would say it's between, again, that character actor that I mentioned before and the kids. The kids in this movie are all across the board. Cameron knows how to direct kids, because some of the kids that are part of Jake's and Natiri's family, they nail it. And if anything, I kind of felt more about those kids than I did about Jake and Natiri themselves. One of which is played by a non-kid. Again, I know that you could. Some of you probably already know who I'm talking about. They're on the IMDb page. They're probably in the trailer. You probably saw hints of them or whatever. Just in case you're going into this movie somewhat blind, I'm not going to say who it is, but let's just say that one of these 3 or 4 kids is played by a non-kid, an adult, and they nailed it. They really nailed it. Cameron knew how to direct this person so that they have kind of like that childlike wonder, and also doing something with their voice so they sound a bit more Na'vi than they originally did, and that's awesome. I also wish that some of these other character actors from the first film I don't know, because there are some other characters returning from the first film, but they're literally given glorified cameos. I was like, why did you even bother calling them back? They're literally on screen. They're literally on screen for like 30 seconds total. You literally shot this in a day, unless there's some kind of extended cut that's going to be coming to Disney Plus or on 4K, which I think some people even mentioned on Twitter that there's probably going to be. Then I really don't see why they needed to be here. Otherwise, though, again, if you're expecting something more from a storytelling perspective or drama, like, oh my God, like, yeah, I don't know where, because there's so many safe choices. There's so many instances where characters are put, sorry, that was my knuckle cracking. There were some instances where the story or the movie's framing things in a way where it's like, oh, this character's in danger. Oh my God, they're running from this creature. And not once then I think to myself, they're fine. They're fine. I didn't feel that endangerment. I really didn't, because up until that point, the script and the characterization plays it safe in favor of developing the world and developing the visual effects in a way that sucks you into that world, which we definitely want to see visual effects be utilized. I, for one, just want, like I said, a little bit more substance with my style. And it doesn't look like 13 years was enough to change that from the original. If anything, the original has a much more digestible running time, because if you're not going to be changing up your script, you don't need to be making a 3-hour movie to compensate for that world. So we'll see where things land. I'm still down to check out the third movie when that does roll in 2024, but if those trailers are doing the same thing as the trailers for this one in the original were, where it's a lot of lingering shots on the environment and the music and things like that, I'm like, I don't know. I'll have to wait until we get those first reactions, because sometimes, if this movie also taught me another thing, is that maybe some of these first reactions can't be taken too much for gospel, because now it's a matter of figuring out who's really telling the truth upon those first impressions and who saw the movie in the same room with Cameron. You know what I'm saying? Otherwise, though, let me know what you guys thought of Avatar: The Way of Water if you're watching this on YouTube in the comment section. If you have not seen it, or you're going to be seeing it for the holidays, whether it be for Christmas Eve day, or New Year's Eve, New Year's Day, or are you going to wait for it to drop on Disney Plus because of how long it is, because of how exhaustive it could be? I do want to hear some comments. Otherwise, though, I'm going to be taking it to Twitter to see what else people are saying about Avatar: The Way of Water. Otherwise, though, I need some water after talking for so long. Appreciate you guys listening, and as always, stay humble. I'll catch you guys on the next entry for the Dark Spider Cast, which at this point is probably going to be my top 10. No, I'm sorry, my top 5 video games of 2022. I know everybody has already made their list, but I haven't. I'm still actually trying to play through some things here, some really quick things on Game Pass, but I think I have it whittled down to what my rankings are for the top 5, as well as my honorable mentions. I just want to do a little bit of due diligence before I finally get in front of the mic and put it out there what my favorite games of 2022 really were. So I'll catch you guys for that one. In the meantime, though, stay safe out there for the holidays, healthy, because nobody knows how to cover their mouth anymore, and stay humble. Peace out, guys.
The way of water connects all things. Before your birth and after your death.
This is our home!
I need you with me. And I need you to be strong.